Hey, review family, keep it high, keep it tight. It's Jay Morris, a review guy, back to bring you another album review. So if I sound bad or look bad, it's because I'm currently sick, which is not very fun. But you know, the one thing that can cheer me up is my favorite band releasing a brand new album, and there was no way that I couldn't cover it in an album review. So this is pretty huge for me. I'd usually be a lot more high energy and energetic than I am. Yes, I have a jacket on and it's in the middle of summer. That should tell you I'm sick. So, we're talking about Erra's new album, Neon. It dropped today, Friday, August the 10th, and it is, I have a lot to say about this album, and I think that goes without saying because they're my favorite band, so I want to critique them. I want to talk about what I liked and what I disliked from the album, and yeah, so 10-track affair, about the same runtime as their previous album, Drift, which is my favorite album by them. And right off the bat, I have to say that the two singles that were released for this album, Breach and Disarray, are two of the really standout tracks on the album. And on Erra's Twitter and Facebook, they have been over time teasing a lot of the tracks with little snippets. I've listened to like one or two of them, but I intentionally kept myself like out of the loop when it came to what they sounded like because I wanted to keep it kind of I guess a surprise for me. I wanted to go into it blind, not knowing what I was going to be hearing. And straight off the bat, I have to say the bass and guitar sound different than they really ever have. And to be frank, the whole album sounds different than it's ever sounded. Whether it be on the vocal front, the drum part, the guitar part, the bass part, all the band members really kind of, except maybe JTKV, really bring out a new type of life into what they're exactly doing. The bass sounds really crunchy, it sounds really pronounced, the drums are just pounding and pummeling and extremely clear. The guitar work is fantastically technical as usual with Erra, but despite the fact that this is an Erra record, you know it's Erra, you can hear it, it sounds like their previous albums for the most part. It definitely has a breath of fresh air when it comes to the sound they're going for, and for a band that has released quite a few albums, I really respect the fact that they're changing up their sound, they're experimenting with different sounds, and I think that it is overall, it's a good album. But it doesn't come without its critiques. For me, in the midst of that experimentation and them trying to find a new sound, I find that despite the technicality being so good, so just on top, I really feel like JTKV's vocals are a bit weak on some of these tracks. And when I say weak, he's a great vocalist. He sounds more aggressive than ever. That actually is a step up. I think that he sounds a lot more kind of aggressive and out there and just raw, even though the mixing's really good on the album, which I can throw that into. The mixing's good. But JT's vocals really do seem like he's almost scared to go into different type of ranges. You're gonna pretty much get his bass scream / growl most of the time, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that he does a fantastic job of that, but I think that he maybe should have went for some different type of vocal techniques, because in many ways it sounds a lot like Drift on his front, but it does sound a little bit more aggressive, like I said. Maybe I'm just spoiled from Garrison Lee back when he was in the band, because he really had an amazing range. He really went out there. But JT really a lot of times will fall into the generic metalcore type of screams and growls, and it makes me a bit sad because as a polar opposite contrast, I think that Jesse Cash is one of the best clean vocalists in the metal game, period, nowadays. Jesse's vocals have improved even more. They improve each album. He's definitely utilizing his range. He's going low, he's going high. You get a track like Breach when he's kind of lower, when he's staying in his lower register at first, but then he goes higher in the chorus and he has these really high parts and low parts, and overall, Jesse's vocals are as good as they've ever been, if not better. I think I still prefer some of his vocal chops on Drift more than Neon, but I think that he still does a fantastic job. Love Jesse Cash. He's definitely the standout in Erra when it comes to just what everyone does. But I have to say that Alex Balu, he is, in my opinion, the standout when it comes to the instrumentation. The drum work on this album is so pronounced, more pronounced than a lot of records I've heard this year from rock and metal. They come in and they're pounding, they're pummeling, they sound so aggressive, so raw, so just unfiltered. and they roar over these really technical riffs and breakdowns that are made to a very interesting type of sound that I've never really heard that much before, especially from Erra, with some of these tracks even having this almost glitchy type of dissonance that reminds me of Within the Ruins, which is something that I would never think I'd say for Erra. But of course, it's djenty. It's very djenty. It has that djent sound to it that is known by Erra fans, that Erra fans love, and for a Sumerian Records band, it's not that uncommon. But when it comes to the lyricism, it's a dark album. It's a really dark album. I think that by far this is Erra's darkest album, because back when Garrison Lee was in the band, I think he was the primary songwriter, there was a lot of stuff about mythology, a lot of stuff about kind of fantasy type of elements, spiritual elements, but it seems that now they're going into more of a realistic, lyrical type of approach to not only their previous album, Drift, which released, was it 2016, or 2017, one of the two. They did that on Drift, and then they're doing it even more on Neon, with a lot of these lyrics seeming very personal, very just introspective. I think that the lyrical front, if you read along with the songs that you are listening to, there's some very insightful, philosophical type of deep and dark lyricism that I think comes across very well. But Erra's always been very good when it comes to lyricism. They have never really made a song or an album that has had weak lyricism. And in the midst of the metal department, I would say that the genre that they're in, which is kind of the progressive metalcore, djenty type of subgenre, I think it's not uncommon for a lot of these bands to dabble in a lot of the same lyrical fronts that Erra is on, not only the original Erra with Garrison Lee, but this era, because this era of Erra. But the lyrics, they're good. I think that a lot of them's been done before in some form or another, but a little more watered down, because Neon, and particularly Erra, they really find a way to phrase things in beautifully poetic verses. And considering it's a metal band, and a lot of people think that when they hear the growls and screams that they're just talking about like death and stuff and violence, read along with these lyrics, because they're very dark, they're very emotional, passionate, and it's obvious that there was some kind of inner turmoil. And I remember watching an interview when they were in, I believe it was Germany, I'm wanting to say, near, was it Cologne? It might have been that. I'm not 100% sure, but I watched an interview, and Jesse and JT were saying that it was their darkest album for Erra, and I can definitely see where that comes from, because despite the fact that they clung more to the mythology earlier on, now that they're taking this realistic approach, they're making it even darker and more emotional than Drift was. And Drift was a fairly deep type of work, but Drift, the difference between Drift and Neon is the fact that Drift focused on taking those lyrical type of ideas and merging them with their normal style, where it was kind of the spiritual and mythological type of lyricism, and they were merging the two. Whereas on Neon, it's a bit more raw when it comes to the lyricism, a bit more blunt, but the way it's phrased is so good, because if you would phrase it in an extremely like blunt way, a simplified way, I don't think it would have had as much punch as it does when it's made into these really well thought out lyrics you can tell took a while to think up. And to be honest, standout tracks, another critique I can have is sometimes songs seem to blend together, and this was the first time since I first heard Impulse that I felt like some of the tracks flow a bit inconsistently when it comes to the overall sound from song to song. But at the same time, I think that each song has its own identity in such a way that it makes each song worth it and stand on their own. But at the same time, I think that consistency-wise, there could have maybe been a touch of more flow and consistency, because a lot of these tracks, they flow a bit poorly in my opinion, and can sometimes feel a bit jilted compared to the last. But that just comes into the play of the fact that they're experimenting. They're doing a lot of experimentation with their sound. They're moving in new directions, and because of that, it's difficult for me to really ascertain whether or not this is their best album. I don't think it is. I think that Drift and Augment are better than Neon, but I believe Neon, well, I know it is. Neon's better than Impulse. I'll tell you that. Neon's better than Impulse. If I had to say, I would say that the EP, Andromeda, Impulse, and Moments of Clarity are behind Neon, and then it would be Neon, Augment, Drift for me. But I think it's a great album. I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10 because of the little flaws that I found, but that's just me being a critiquey reviewer. As a music listener, when I was listening through this album, I couldn't find too much wrong with it, although some parts can feel a little weak or a bit jilted consistency-wise, and JT's vocals maybe don't go too far with his range, and that's all fine because it's Erra. The technicality is good, and the drum work, bass work, and guitar work, even if you're not into metal, should be enough to make you stay because it really is just amazing when it comes to the technicality front. This might be Erra's best album when it comes to the instrumentation because while Drift and Augment and Impulse, all their albums are very technical, very heavy when it comes to that, this is their heaviest album in my opinion. Like I said, JT sounds more aggressive than he ever has, and Alex on the drums sounds like an absolute beast, like an octopus, and he's just banging away as hard as he can. And I think that also may have something to do with the mix, because the mixing on this album is very well constructed. I'm not sure who mixed this album, but whoever did a fantastic job. And it makes every instrument kind of have its own little box that it's put in beside each other, and you can hear each instrument that's playing to its full extent, which is something that a lot of metal and rock albums will have an issue with, specifically metal albums, where some of the instruments can get kind of lost in the background, but not with this album. Every instrument sounds very pronounced, it sounds very punchy, has a lot of power behind it, and overall the instrumentation is by far the best thing, which it usually is with Erra. Other than that, I don't really have much to say. I liked all of the tracks on the album. Breach and Disarray are standouts, but my favorite track is track 6, Ghost of Nothing. That track, in my opinion, is a banger. It's definitely my favorite from the album, and I would love to hear what you guys think. You can go to Sumerian Records YouTube channel and find all these songs, and they're also up on Spotify if you want to go listen to the album that way or any other way. Go purchase the album, support the band, and I would love to hear what you guys think. I'll talk to you guys next time. Like, comment, subscribe for a shout out. It helps me out a lot, and I'll see you next time. Until then, I'm Jay Morris, the Review Guy, and I'm signing off saying farewell.